Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with Conversations That Matter for the New American. We are with a very special guest. His name is Jay Jusino, and I first met Jay on a speaking tour a couple of years ago, where I was going around the country talking about education. And he gave me a copy of a book that he had written that is fascinating and that is sorely needed in today's world. It's called "Truth Is Fallen in the Street." And it's on pedagogy, and the pedagogy in particular of Christian teachers in public schools, but he also has a lot of expertise in what a true Christian education should look like. Jay, thank you for joining us, and tell us to begin with, what's the problem with Christian teachers trying to leave their Christianity at the door when they are teaching in a government-funded so-called school?
Well, leaving Christianity at the door really teaches kids that you can do just that. Leave your Christianity at the door. There's a time and place to have Christian views and opinions, and there's a time not to. I think that when teachers teach, when Christians are teaching in any setting, but in a public setting, and they don't mention Christ, they don't mention the Bible, they don't mention the Word of God, what they're doing is they're essentially validating that you can have a secular sacred dichotomy, a split between the truth of reality and what everyone else does over here. So I think that's it's a danger I think a lot of Christian teachers don't consider.
And so, how should Christian teachers in a public school approach this? I mean, knowing full well that the administrators, the principal would freak out if they dared to say, "Hey, yeah, the textbook says that you came from slime over billions of years, but if you compare that with Genesis, Genesis says God created." Yeah, yeah. How should a teacher approach that, knowing that they may very well be risking their job?
Well, I totally understand that, and I have some experience with that. I think that the truth is more important than someone's job. That's the nuts and bolts of it. I think that okay, so a teacher can teach anything, and we all know that there's false teaching. Teaching isn't the real thing. It's the impartation of knowledge. And knowledge begins with God. God made everything. He owns everything. He sustains everything. He's got a purpose for everything. If you don't share God in the content of the teaching, then you're how can I say this? You are disconnecting the student's content from reality. And I would simply say for a teacher that you shouldn't do that. Connecting the content to reality is what's important. And teachers ought to do that, whether they get fired or not. And unfortunately, and I address that in the book. I mean, I think the book, there it is. I have a whole section devoted to that kind of objection. A teacher might say, well, what if I did that? I'd get fired. Well, I understand that that's what might happen, but I would submit that the truth is more important than job stability.
Yeah, and so do you think public school teachers who are Christian ought to see themselves as kind of missionaries, shining the light in a dark place where it's just filled with lies and deception? Should they think of themselves as kind of bringing the torch of God's truth into the school?
I do. I think they should. And you know what? I don't want to hammer Christians who are in the public school because I know that probably most of them have a good heart. They want to do the right thing. They want to help kids. They want to witness for Christ. But my point is that when they disconnect the teaching with reality, the reality of God, they are disconnecting the two, and they're not helping matters. The way I put it this way: to divorce academic education from God is to execute an academic and biblical non sequitur. And it does not advance the young heart and mind, but instead hinders it. If you, biology is my area of training. Well, who is the creator of life? Well, God is. He's the creator of atoms. So how can you deal with science without talking about God? Again, his creation, his sustenance of things, and his purpose. So that's what I think. I think as such, Christians can be. They're sharing the truth. They're sharing what the reality is, and that's what they should do.
Yeah, in the notes that you sent me before we went on live to record, you said something really interesting. You mentioned that it would be like trying to study all the words of Shakespeare and going through, line by line, but never mentioning the fact that a guy called Shakespeare actually wrote all of this. It'd be a plagiarism of the highest order. And it does really seem like something wild has happened in public schools. In fact, the justice who wrote the dissent back in the early 1960s, when the Supreme Court formalized, put the final nails in the coffin, saying no more Bible reading, no more prayer, things like that. He actually said something really interesting. He said, what we're doing here is not the realization of a state of neutrality with respect to religion. He said what we're actually doing is establishing the religion of secularism in the public schools. And so now it's at the point where a Christian cannot go in and reasonably be expected to teach the secularist religion, or as John Dewey might have called it, the humanist religion, in good conscience, and still be faithful to, I think, what the Bible commands. So, in the last few minutes, and on the other side of the break, I want to talk about, Christian schools, because we know that a lot of this, unfortunately, has infected the Christian schools. But we've got a few minutes left before we go to break. Um, walk us through, how should a Christian teacher in a public school system approach this? What's the fine line there? Do they just walk in and say, "Hey guys, it's a fact that God created you," or do they take a more nuanced approach, or what do you think is appropriate?
Well, once again, people's emotions are difficult to deal with. We all feel attacked when our position is criticized or critiqued, and so you got to be very careful with how things are presented. But let's put it this way: if just try to put it into a real world situation as an example. If you were there at an intersection of a road and someone came along and they wanted to go to, let's say, Atlanta, and Atlanta was on the left, and then the other way was to a different destination, and you knew they wanted to go to Atlanta, would you just say, well, you could go this way? Some say this goes to Atlanta, and some say this goes to Atlanta. You choose for yourself. No, you're going to tell them this is the way to Atlanta. Now, do they have to believe you? Well, no, they don't. But that's how it should be presented. You present things as the truth, fully recognizing that people have their own opinions. They have the freedom. God has given people the freedom to make up their own mind about these things. And so you don't try to, in that sense, you're not jamming Christianity down someone's throat, but you're just presenting it as it is. Think of it this way. I've asked people many times, Christians, who's the most important person in all history? And they say, well, Jesus Christ. I mean, it's invariably that's the answer. Well, if you're a Christian in a public school and you're teaching history, how can you teach history without mentioning Jesus Christ, the center person of all history? Does that make sense? And so you just say it as it is. That doesn't mean the students have to believe what you're saying, but it's up to the students then to ferret that out. So the Bible verse I had above my board for years, Proverbs 18:17, the first to present his case seems right until another one comes forward and questions him. It's a process of cross-examination. Our legal system is based on it, and every student has the freedom to cross-examine everything. And I always tell my students, you don't have to believe me, but if I'm correct, if I'm true, if what I'm saying is accurate, you should believe me. And how are you going to know that? You got to cross-examine. You got to do your research. You got to study. You got to look at the Bible. You got to look at these other things and examine it yourself. That's what people should do. So teachers ought to put their material out as the truth, fully recognizing and giving students the freedom to not believe it or cross-examine it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And we've only got about a minute left before we go to break. But the former Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr, and I'm no fan of Bill Barr, but he said something really interesting at a recent meeting of the Council for National Policy. He said that there are real First Amendment concerns about the public school system now, because they are teaching, not a neutral point of view, if there ever could be such a thing, but they are hostile to Christianity. And yet the overwhelming majority of taxpayers who are funding these indoctrination centers say that they are Christian. Do you see a First Amendment concern here? Has the government established a religion, and are they teaching it, forcing it on our children with our tax money?
They have established a religion, and yes, secular humanism has been recognized, as you said earlier, being established with the Supreme Court. Most Christians, I'll try to say it this way: Christians would not think at all of sending their kids to a Muslim school to learn Islam, but yet they send their kids to a secular humanist school to learn secular humanism. It is equally a false religion, but yet they do it anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Folks, we're going to go to break in just a moment, but we'll be back on the other side. We're going to talk about how all of this has also infiltrated Christian schools. Stay with us. We will be right back. Before we went to break, we were talking about Christians in government schools and what's going on in the government schools. Now I want to spend some time on Christian schools. America has a very vibrant ecosystem of Christian schools. We've got tens of thousands of them across this country. In fact, something like 25% of all the schools in America are supposedly Christian schools, and yet so many of them are not really Christian schools. Jay, tell us, what is the state of Christian education today in America?
Well, unfortunately, Alex, it's my opinion that the state of Christian education is waning quickly. I think the Christian education world is sinking. I think that ultimately, in order to stay afloat financially and to keep people coming in the doors, Christian leaders within Christian schools are compromising and ultimately adopting the narratives of the world to make sure that again, the doors stay open. And I think that it's just getting worse and worse.
And so, give us some specific examples. What are Christian schools doing wrong? I know some of them, for example, are using government school textbooks. Some of them have even submitted to kind of government accreditation programs where they want their teachers to have an official permit from the government to be able to teach. Where did they go wrong? What are some specific things that maybe they ought not be doing, or some specific things that they should be doing that they're not doing? And of course, we're speaking generally, because of course there are some that are doing a phenomenal job, but just generally speaking, where do you think they could use improvement?
Of course, yes, and I'm not out to say all Christian schools are bad or that everyone in the Christian schools. That's not at all my point, and I'm certainly not out to defer to the public school in any way. But there's a lot of issues that have affected Christian education, and from a big picture perspective, I think one of the biggest issues I can say is accreditation and certification, teacher certification, and accreditation of schools, because parents have been, of course, trained in our communist education system, 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto. In America, they've been trained to think a certain way, and the institutions and establishments want certification. They want accreditation, but as the left has overtaken that really from its inception, the school accreditation process and teacher certification process, basically what happens is, in order to teach in an open Christian school and run it, teachers have to be certified from the state, and even if it's not required because of a private charter, if you will, that's what administrators prefer. And because of that, you get a lot of your teachers are essentially trained in leftist ideology in education, leftist methodology, and they don't recognize it. So Christian schools will simply, over time, without realizing it, fall into the same narrative and direction and teaching methods that are in the public school. And that's what's happening. And so you get, critical race theory being taught today in Christian schools. And one of the big things is Christian teachers and even administrators don't recognize it. They don't see it. They don't understand it. They're just going along with the narrative because that's what they've been trained and taught to do.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of them have their degrees from the state college where they learn the exact same thing that the teachers going into the government brainwash camps have. It's just it's an atrocity. So I want to talk about the Association for Christian Schools International, the ACSI. Historically, they've been kind of considered the gold standard when it comes to certifying and accrediting Christian schools, and yet more and more people are sounding the alarm. One of the big scandals that came up recently, they partnered with an organization called Unify Ed or whatever, run by Walter Strickland, a guy who whatever he claims to the contrary, really has gotten really enmeshed in this whole critical race theory ideology, supposedly with a Christian spin, right? We have a biblical way of looking at critical race theory. How significant of a problem is this, and what should Christian schools be thinking regarding ACSI?
Well, unfortunately, it goes back to what I just was mentioning about school accreditation. ACSI has sort of been the accrediting rubber stamp, if you will, of the majority of Christian schools. I know there's other associations out there, but that's a big one, not just in America but worldwide. And so, if you get ACSI stamp of approval, you look good in the eyes of the administration because they advertise that to parents. But at the end of and that's because of that. The importance of that and the largest of that, that is the institution that the left needed to take over. And they're doing it, and they really have done it already with the critical race theory. And so I think that unfortunately, what it looks like to the average Christian parent as they send their kids to an ACSI accredited Christian school, it looks all official, above board, and we believe this has been proven to be a good school because of this certification. Well, because ACSI has gone to the left, hard left, over the past years, you can be assured that the critical race theory will come down the pipe to those Christian schools. The parents won't realize it, the kids won't realize it, and it'll just like the frog in the pot, slowly warming up, and that's what's happening. And then you get to a point where you get Christian administrators pushing onto their teachers, who then push it onto the kids, these false ideas, these Marxist concepts, and no one really knows about it. That's what's happening. So ACSI is really, it's been taken over essentially by the left, and it's become really an arm of the state, if you will.
Wow. All right, folks, you heard it, a clear warning. Jay, ending on a positive note here, we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. What should a Christian school look like? What are some words of wisdom you have for Christian school administrators, teachers? How can they be faithful to Christ and really responsibly carry out their charge to help parents educate these children and disciple them in a proper way?
Well, I'm going to fundamentally go back to the Bible on that. In Acts chapter 4 and chapter 5, we saw John, was it Peter and John, I think it was, that were preaching in Christ's name, and they were told not to do so. And they got thrown in jail. And of course, they immediately went back out and did it again, as soon as they were done. And the key takeaway I'm getting from that is, for Christian education, Christian administrators, stick with the truth, not with the cultural narratives. Stick with the truth. If it costs you students, if it costs you prestige within the community, stick with the truth. That's what we need to do. I think Christians, in order to, save the school, if you will, in terms of the population, again, administrators will capitulate to false narratives, and in doing so, they jettison the truth. They got to stick with the scripture. They have to not be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they got to not mix the gospel of Jesus Christ with other doctrines, with other teachings that are false, that will water down and ultimately destroy the message of the gospel. And that's what's happening. The Christian schools are becoming friends to the world. But my advice is, administrators, don't let that happen. Let God provide and not rely on the state to provide.
Yep, absolutely. Jay, where can people get your book, Truth Has Fallen in the Streets, and tell us why people need it?
Well, they can get it I took it off Amazon. I really don't like Amazon, I have to confess. And I know people have to deal with things we don't like. But nevertheless, I took it off Amazon. It's on Vervante.com. You go to their bookstore. That's where you can find Truth Has Fallen in the Street. And, even if this is written to Christians who are teaching in the public school. And so I realize that's a very narrow group of people, but they affect so many people by their teaching. And so, and the principles of the book are applicable across the board. If you understand the principles of the book, you can make good decisions regarding education in other areas and settings.
Excellent. Well, Jay, thank you so much for being with us. Folks, it's Jay Jusino, and he is the author of Truth Is Fallen in the Streets. We thank you for listening. Till next time, God bless you all.